authority data. And I mean, I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's just ingest. Yeah.
Yeah, and
yeah,
then
that
I
doesn't
put
really.
a couple slides on for hurricane hunters.
Okay. Yeah, that's the other big cut.
Yeah, everything I put on there, I figured you guys could
Hey everybody, Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here. Thanks for tuning in to Live Impact Weather tonight. Got a little respite last week. I was over in Boise, Idaho at the AMS conference. You probably saw me chime in with Brittany. Thanks to Brittany for filling in for me. Tonight we're going to have Tim Buckley joining us coming up in about 10 minutes from Greensboro, but we're going to start with your area forecast discussion for the Charlotte metro area and surrounding regions. We actually had a pretty warm day. We hit in the low 90s again. But unlike we've seen the last week or so, we've actually seen fewer rain chances today, which is kind of nice. It's given us a little bit of a break. And I say that's kind of nice because tomorrow we're going to see that pattern flip back on to some pretty strong showers and storms. So quick check of the radar. Looks pretty quiet, actually. For the first time in a long time, I don't have a lot of storms. And, even when we typically have isolated storms, there's at least one or two big storms. Even tonight, the isolated storms are tiny. I mean, these are the kind where it could be raining in your front yard and not your backyard. That's just kind of the pattern we're in this evening. I'll zoom in on a couple areas for folks that are out there planning this evening. We've got some isolated showers moving through York County. In Mecklenburg County, we had one little cluster near Uptown. That kind of fell apart. And then another little area of showers pushing to the north into Iredell County. Probably the most active area today has been in the North Carolina mountains. That's where we've seen active showers and storms on and off this afternoon. We've actually had some flood advisories for a brief period of time. But as we look at the wider view here, I'll show you all of the southeast is pretty quiet compared to what we saw the last couple of days, especially late last week. I mean, we had some brutal storms kind of around that ridge of high pressure. As we widen the view out, a couple things that you'll notice here in the eastern half of the country. One, we've got a pretty strong cold front for this time of the year, and I say strong, it's just enough to trigger thunderstorms, not enough to give us a dramatic cool down, though I think when you see the lower dew points, you'll see the impact it's going to have. You notice that cold front there, that's what's going to help trigger the showers and storms for your Tuesday evening. And something we're going to be talking about, I'll be talking about with Tim, is that little kind of mess. I'll call the mess. It's not really a swirl, but down over the northeastern Gulf and off the Florida Panhandle, west coast of Florida, there's some disturbed weather, which we'll talk about coming up in our national segment with Tim. But that's something we'll keep an eye on. But as we go into tomorrow, that's going to be potentially something we'll watch if you're going down to Florida. Now, let me look at your forecast this evening. Upper 80s here through the next hour or so. If you got overnight plans, it's going to be in the mid-70s. Heads up for some fog tomorrow morning. Now, current temperatures, I'm going to show them to you just because I want to see how we actually are. I hate the word cool because it's still 91. It's not as hot. How about that? That's a better way to frame this. But what's interesting about today is it was our 12th consecutive day of 90 degrees or higher. And you're probably saying, that's a pretty long streak, Brad. Well, you would be correct because that's the longest streak of this year, obviously, but it's also the longest streak of last year. It's also the longest streak of 2023. It's the longest streak since 2022. So it has been a while since we've seen a hot streak like this. I always like to keep track of this because to me, 90-degree days kind of tell you how hot the summer or year has been in general. So far this year, 15 90-degree days. 12 of them in a row, mind you, 13 last year at this point. So we're ahead of last year's pace. And by the way, today's the last day of June. It's going to end up being the 11th warmest June on record and the hottest June since 2015, I think is correct. And if you remember 2015, that was a crazy hot summer. So what are the longest stretches of 90-degree heat? I was not here in 1993. I was here in 2007 for that one, 32 days in a row. I know that summer because that was summer I got married. It was brutally hot in Charlotte. And 32 days. Think about a whole month plus of 90 degrees or higher. So that kind of shows you how long it can go. 2020, we had a 20-day stretch. And right now, remember, we're at 12. Number 10 on this list is 18 days. Thanks for removing my head just to show you that, James. 18 days.
Get your head out of there, Brad.
Yeah. If we don't hit 90 tomorrow or Wednesday, which is going to be close, I think 89, 90, we could keep this streak. That 18, we could end up in the top 10 for sure. So that's why tomorrow and Wednesday is kind of an interesting couple of days. Just for, if you're a stats geek like me or a climate geek, you're like, okay, if we don't hit 90 tomorrow, the streak's over. But if we do, that's 13. If we do it Wednesday, that's 14. Now, those 18 days in a row will be in reach, and maybe even 19 or 20. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. If we don't hit 90 tomorrow, that streak ends. But if we do, that top 10 list could have a new addition coming up. So tomorrow, we're going to have the potential for some pretty good storms in the afternoon and evening. In fact, tomorrow on this show, I'm sure we'll have a great topic, but we'll probably be tracking storms, honestly. I have a feeling, because look how quiet it is tonight. The one thing I noticed about tomorrow morning, you see all those low clouds? Probably some pretty thick fog in the morning. That's another reason why we might not hit 90 tomorrow. If we have fog in the morning for a while, that would block the sun enough to keep us from warming up too quickly. The other factor will be these afternoon storms, which will bubble up. It looks like to me evening. I say afternoon. I would primarily look at evening time. So think 5, 6, 7 o'clock. And these could linger well into the evening. That's why tomorrow at this time, we do the show every night at 6:30. You're likely going to see us probably tracking storms well past the show and into the overnight hours as these move out. And then that weak little front, it's not a huge front, moves through and actually dries us out. And what I mean by dry, not only from a lack of rainfall, but lower humidity levels as well. So tomorrow, we're not quite at the alert level yet, though I would stay tuned. We certainly could see this upgraded. Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. to midnight, scattered strong storms. Gusty winds will be our biggest impact. We're not looking at a big hail setup, though you can never rule out some small hail. Certainly not a tornado risk. There's no shear. It's really going to be gusty winds, downburst type winds in this situation. So stay tuned for updates as we get closer to tomorrow evening. Now, this is the good part. I promise you, the dew points, low 70s, air you can wear. Could we legit have a break from the air you can wear? I mean, low 60 dew points, and I've said this several times, feel great in the summer because typically a 70-degree dew point is super sticky. If we get low 60s for dew points, the sun goes down, you're in the shade, you have an umbrella, it feels pretty good. It actually feels somewhat cool. And if you have those mister fans, they actually could work. One of the problems with dealing with those mister fans, which was kind of ironic, I'll talk about this maybe with Tim, when I was in AMS in Boise, very dry climate. They had misters all over the patios of all the restaurants and bars there, and they were amazing. It cooled the air because it was evaporating and causing it to get cooler. Here, it's so muggy that doesn't evaporate. You just get wet. So that's why I think by later this week, we actually could see some much drier air moving in, and that would actually feel pretty good. So everybody planning for the 4th of July, let's take a look at that forecast, because I think this is what everybody cares about late this week. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, low 90s, so a dry heat. Yes, I'm saying that in the Carolinas in early July, a dry heat, low 90s, and probably less than a 10% chance of rain each day. I hate to say 0%, because this time of year it's almost impossible to have a 0% chance of rain, but there's a pretty good chance that could be the case for the 4th. And remember last year, if you forget, I know it's been a year, I remember distinctly, it was 98 degrees on the 4th last year, and on July 5th it was 101. That was our 100-degree day from last year. It was on July 5th, so it was brutal last year at this time. So let's look at the 7-day forecast. We'll do that first. We'll go in depth here. This is the one great thing about this show. Instead of just glancing at the 7-day real briefly, we'll give you kind of a detailed look. So tomorrow and Wednesday will be the 2 days we could break our 90-degree streak. I'm still going to forecast 90 because I think we'll have enough time to get there before the storms build, but I certainly would be not shocked if it's 88 or 89 tomorrow or Wednesday. And then starting Thursday, the 90s return, but it's a dry heat through the 4th. And then if we don't break that streak, this is why I think we could be in that top 10 list, because potentially we could add to that, because going into next week, those temperatures jump right back up into the low and mid 90s. So that long look at the 10-day forecast kind of shows you this will probably be the coolest weather we see for a while the next couple of days. And it's mainly going to be because of some clouds, the scattered showers and storms, and then possibly some slightly drier air. So the 4th this year, I'm not going to jinx it. We'll knock on this fake wood on my desk here. We're likely going to have some pretty good weather for the 4th with a low chance of rain. So all those outdoor activities, get out and enjoy it. Of course, we'll have updates coming up throughout the week. But coming up in just a few minutes, probably about 30 seconds, we're going to be joined by Tim Buckley. We'll see you in a second. All right, there we go. I want to say welcome to Tim. I see him next to me right now. I'm Brad Panovich down in Charlotte, and let me introduce Tim Buckley. For those that don't know, you're on both of our streaming platforms. Welcome, Tim. How you doing?
Doing good, Brad. Hope you are. Here in Greensboro, we're tracking some, pretty similar weather here in the Triad part of the state, but happy to join your viewers on WCNC Plus in Charlotte and our viewers here on WFMY Plus in Greensboro, and kind of be something new every day, talking about Carolina weather and national weather and everything in between. So excited to join you here for this chat.
All right, well, I can't hear you, Tim, so everybody else can hear you, so that's the good news. That's the good news. And what we're going to start with the tropics. And I hope you guys, I didn't hear Tim, but I knew you guys did. I hope he said that you're going to enjoy joining us every night at 6:30 for this show on both WCNC Plus and WFMY Plus. But we want to start, Tim, talking tonight because I know you just did your forecast up in the Greensboro. We just did it here, and we got storms tomorrow. But everybody's focused on, obviously, 4th of July weekend, and a lot of folks go to the beach this time of year. And we've got this, I don't want to say it's potential because it's not potential that's super high, but we might have some tropical development over Florida, maybe a 20% chance. And at the very least, we're going to have some wet weather over Florida. But I know everybody in our coast, and I'm sure you're hearing it, oh my gosh, I'm going to the beach this weekend. Should I cancel or change my plans? What are your thoughts about this system, and what have you been telling folks that are heading to the coast this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to watch, Brad, here. As we go through tropical season, as we go through hurricane season, one of the types of ways you can develop a storm, as we know as meteorologists, is that you can kind of have a homegrown system. The best way to do that is to have a front that kind of moves just offshore, stalls out, and then you have just a better way to focus any of that energy. The oceans, the Gulf, wherever you might be, there's already a lot of heat energy there. If you go to our Carolina coastline this time of year, you head just offshore, you go deep sea fishing, something like that, you're gonna find warmer water right over that Gulf Stream. Not the case back a couple months ago, but right now there's lots of energy. So what the Hurricane Center is kind of highlighting here and what we're seeing is that just potential, a low chance that as that same front that might give us lower humidity, better chances to stay dry, well, it also might make it a little more possible for low pressure to form somewhere off the Atlantic coast or in the Gulf Coast. To me, Brad, I don't think it's that big of a risk like you were saying. It doesn't look like many of the models are hanging on to that right there today, but it's something to keep an eye on, and maybe keep an eye on the forecast, especially if you're going south this weekend. Maybe not so much the Outer Banks, but down closer to Georgia, South Carolina, and especially Florida.
Yeah, at the very least could increase the afternoon storm chances we typically see on the beach. We'll see if things spin up. What's interesting, so I know James is here. James, let's actually show one of the new tools we have this year. We talked about this last week, and Tim, you could probably see this, but this is the Google AI modeling for tropical cyclones. And so just as you were mentioning, not many models forecasting it, we can turn them all on, and I'll kind of advance here. And you only see a few of the ensemble members trying to develop something off the Florida coast this weekend. Really, I would say maybe a tenth of the ensemble members have anything, and none of them really develop below. So that's not a real strong signal when you're looking at ensemble members that you don't have a ton of them showing a bunch of development out there. But, this time of year, stalled fronts, even thunderstorm complexes that come down and sit over these warm coastal waters, you always got to watch that potential that something could spin up quickly down there. And I would say, even though I wouldn't change my weekend plans for the coast, I think this is just a good reminder this time of year, before you go to the coast, check the forecast, see if there's a system developing down there and possibly spinning up. And we will probably potentially have some issues maybe going down the road. Tim, before we get off this topic, I wanted to mention something real quickly because something I dealt coming back from AMS last week was this time of year too, we've got these thunderstorms and they're affecting flights all over the country. Atlanta was absolutely crushed by storms last week. And while I only had an hour delay, that was not so good for a lot of my colleagues coming back from that conference.
It's a tough time of year to fly, isn't it? I mean, boy, we've had so much lightning lately, Brad. I think a lot of viewers are kind of asking, why has there been so much lightning lately compared to a couple months ago where we were talking, a few weeks ago, we kind of had been in a bit of a lightning drought, a bit of a storm drought almost. That's totally flipped the switch now that we're in our heat wave. When you have more heat, more humidity, more of that cape or that storm energy, that storm fuel that we talk about, you get that air just racing up in the atmosphere, and boy, oh boy, these storms have been super electric. So I don't really envy anybody in the skies out there the last couple of weeks, because especially these big airports, you get those dominoes to start to fall. It's just real hard to put everything back together. They can get the ground stops. I mean, that's just a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I'm hoping to have someone on from Charlotte Douglas to talk about this, because one of the things I know is I was stuck in Minneapolis for an hour, and I was in the Delta Sky Lounge, and there was people not flying anywhere near the East Coast that were delayed, and they couldn't understand. But as you mentioned, the planes that they're flying on are probably flying through Atlanta at some point. And so when that plane gets delayed, the spoke and hub system, when the major airports like Atlanta, D.C., Dallas get impacted, these airlines have these trickle-down effects.
Yeah, they do. And, I don't really have any advice for people, but personally for me, if I'm trying to visit family in the summertime, I do try and book those early morning flights if I can find them.
That is such a guarantee. That is a great tip.
I mean, it increases your chances though, because you're probably not going to have morning thunderstorms. Never a guarantee, but there's not as good of a chance, and at least you'll know if your plane got to the airport the night before. So if I know if I'm flying out of Greensboro, my plane's here at 5 a.m., I'm probably going to be okay. But if it's got to go 2, 3, 4 stops and gets here at 1 p.m., you might have a different story.
Yeah, that's such a great tip. Those morning flights, at least your plane's taken off. And you might get delayed later in the day, but man, these afternoon flights, and then you get stuck at the airport overnight. It's the worst thing. So let's go to our next topic. Yeah, our next topic tonight. So this story was kind of all over social media a little bit, and you saw a lot of this last week. We were seeing a lot of NOAA cuts. There's been a lot of back and forth, but this was an interesting kind of development last week. The Department of Defense terminated a contract with NOAA to provide satellite data that we use quite a bit actually during hurricane season to see basically developing systems. And it's somewhat controversial because this wasn't really a budgetary cut thing. It really wasn't anything to do with DOGE or politically motivated. This had more to do with the fact that these satellites are going to be discontinued in the very near future. And the DoD, for whatever reason, even though they're still working, decided to terminate this contract early. And so this is just another one of those things, Tim, I think that could have an impact on the upcoming hurricane season. What are your thoughts about this, and of what you've read so far? What is your biggest concern with this lack of satellite data?
Yeah, it's certainly, whenever you get tools, you don't want to lose any of them, right? So kind of begs the question, what would replace it going forward, or if anything? To our viewers who might be, seeing this image on the screen, it might not look like a typical satellite that we would show you on air a lot of times. This is not actually showing you the clouds necessarily, but it's kind of more of an X-ray of the storm a little bit that kind of shows kind of that banding organization. When we talk about hurricanes, you can have eye walls, you can have a couple different eye walls actually, and sometimes the best way to kind of, cut through the noise is to look at one of these microwave images that kind of shows what's inside. So without that, we might be, left to guess a little bit more rather than have that precision view. So, Brad, when we were at AMS last week, was there anyone talking about what to do when these go away, or any other replacements, or that we're just kind of do without it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I heard was, because I think rapid intensification is where we're going to have a big problem with these satellites, because as you know, those microwave images, and you can really see the concentric eye walls and the bands. And one of the things, there are some other microwaves imagery from other satellites. They just don't cover the Earth as frequently as these other. I mean, like you said, you're taking tools out, so you're getting less frequent updates. I guess the other thing that would help is if we could do more hurricane hunter flights, but we know some of those have been pulled back, especially on the NOAA side. So that would be one way to replace that data. But it definitely was a big talking point out of AMS. Just no, I think the biggest thing, and this is not going to be a political debate or argument, was just there's a lot of unknowns, Tim, of like what's going to be available and what's not. We honestly just don't know in some cases.
Sure. And it's, it's not unique to weather or anything. It's a lot of, segments of life. You hear about it on the tariff front or anything else. People are adapting and focusing on the changes, and we don't really know where that's going to go or how many impacts there will be. But some uncertainty is there, and I don't think a lot of us are super comfortable with that going into the hurricane season. So we'll have to see, kind of how it works out over the next couple of months. Hopefully things mostly stay the same, but without some of those tools that we're used to, we might have to go about it in different ways.
Yeah, so on that kind of same vein, Tim, the NOAA budget was released, at least the preliminary budget. This is not a final draft, by the way. This is kind of what gets thrown out for next year. So there's a bunch of proposed cuts to NOAA next year, and a lot of them do end up impacting us because a lot of these centers for research are going to be impacted. So what you see on the screen is some of the cuts that, and this is complete cancellation, the coastal resiliency, navigation, ocean map and ecosystem services, coral reef conservation, ocean exploration, I'll spit it out, ocean acidification, observations, OAR and NOS, but in particular there was some tropical budget cuts to this as well, some of the research that goes into the Hurricane Center. And Tim, this is like something that has been going on, I feel like, for a long time. Since I remember the reason I'm in broadcast television right now is because when I was graduating from Ohio State, there was a hiring freeze in NOAA. I feel like every year there's something going on in NOAA because it's always weird to me that the Weather Service and NOAA is in the Department of Commerce, and when people want to make budget cuts, the Department of Commerce seems like a natural thing to cut, and not realizing all these departments are within the Department of Commerce.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's in the Department of Commerce because weather forecasting can have benefits to the economy, right? You have good weather forecasts, you can have a good supply chain, you can have good moving of goods and services, good safety, good all these other things. So maybe that's where it comes from, but that's interesting. I didn't know that's how you got into the field, but talking to a lot of younger meteorologists who I kind of mentor a little bit now, they're dealing with these right now. The recent grads, there's not really many opportunities to get in right now with a lot of cuts, and I guess that could be the same with a lot of federal jobs, but again, more news of fewer weather services rather than more. I did hear too, like if you saw the movie Twister, right? The National Severe Storms Laboratory out in Oklahoma, right? That's on the chopping block too, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and that's the scary part because some of these centers like NSSL and down in Miami, the hurricane research, this is where like our research and development into these models and forecasting techniques come from. This is how we've gotten so good at what we do, and we are the world leader in some of these instances in forecasting. So it'd be a shame to see this go away. My hope is that we've seen along the way that people will realize, hey, we need these things, because I think it's just a line item cut. Someone with a spreadsheet goes, we need to get rid of this thing, and down the road,
Sure.
people, local constituents will speak up and say, hey, these are things we actually do need. We can certainly find other locations to save money or be more efficient, and certainly there's a lot of things that could be more efficient. So we'll transition now to our typical viewer questions. Sometimes I wish we'd call this mean tweets, but Tim, you posted a graphic that was really interesting, and we got a bunch of questions, and I did last week. I should debunk this several times. We got the mythical heat lightning questions from the last week or so. Talk about the graphic, because you built a great graphic. This explains it perfectly. But heat lightning's not a thing, folks. And I think there's some good background and folklore of where it came from. But there's a clear explanation,
right,
especially now with radar apps and the ability to know where things are. Back in the day, you just saw lightning on a hot summer night. You didn't hear thunder. You thought, well, it's hot, it's lightning, let's call it heat lightning. But that's not the case, right, Tim?
Yeah, it's a causation, not a correlation thing. And we never want to tell you that your grandma's wrong. That is not. That does not give us joy. That is not what we want to do. But we do have more understanding of things nowadays, right? Lightning can only be created in, an atmospheric process. So it's not just happening from heat. A lot of times what you're seeing is a big, tall thunderstorm really, really far away. And it's hard to even explain to you how tall these things are. These storms can be 40, 50,000 feet. I mean, I was in Greensboro looking at a storm in Fayetteville the other day. That's super far away, y'all, at 50 miles plus. And in the daytime, you would not see that lightning, but at nighttime, you can. And that thunder cannot travel the same distance that the light can, because the sound just goes away. So usually if you're within about 15 miles or so, you're at risk of being struck by lightning and you might hear that thunder. But farther out from that, you're just going to see it. And that's just something cool that you can observe. And if it's that far away, you're really not in any danger. It's just kind of part of a summer night. And we'll probably have some of that tonight. We'll definitely have some of it tomorrow night, I'm sure, too.
Oh yeah, for sure. And a great example is that's one of my favorite things about going to the beach is when you see the offshore storms way off in the distance. You can't hear the thunder, but you see that lightning offshore. And I always pull out radar scope on the beach, and you're like, "Holy cow, that thing's 30 miles offshore or something," and it blows your mind. We've actually seen storms at the beach from our Charlotte Tower cam, and I think it's a good point you mentioned. Sometimes these storms are 30, 40, 50,000 feet tall, so you're going to see the tops of them, and when they're electrified like they are in the summer, it's pretty amazing. So another great picture you got this week, and I know last week was the Fireball Bonanza daytime, but you got a great shot, speaking of the beach, of another meteor. Tell me about this picture, because this is a great picture, by the way. It's a long exposure shot from the Outer Banks of this meteor that was caught.
So this was my buddy down there, Forrest. He was doing a time lapse actually. He was out there. He's out in Oak Island actually, is where he is. And he was looking out offshore, and I think there was some of that lightning that he was trying to capture. This is a bit of a cropped image here to a smaller part of the frame, but what you see is another one of these fireballs. And up here in the Greensboro area, we didn't have as much conversation about that last week because we couldn't see it quite as well as down in Charlotte, but this big bolide or meteorite that came down in South Carolina created a big flash in the daytime sky, which is super rare. Nighttime, a little more common to see a fireball, and if you do, sometimes it can have this little bit of a greenish tint to it. Amazing illumination here, and it's contrasted with that night sky, and it's just a warm summer night. I'm so jealous of him. I can't remember ever seeing as good of a fireball as we get these pictures of personally. Just haven't been lucky, I guess. But they're out there, and if you ever see one, let us know.
It's so funny sometimes. I have cameras on my roof that are always rolling. They're like Ring cameras. You catch them, and people are like, "Oh, I wish I would have known." It's like nobody knows when these things are going to happen. It's like you can't time them out. So he was extremely lucky to be doing a time lapse and catch it. That's probably the only way you could get it. Speaking of the fireball last week, one thing that was pretty cool that I saw after that, that fireball down in Georgia, was the meteorite hunters are out collecting meteorites all over Georgia, and they're finding a bunch of fragments, and I see people selling them already online, which is crazy. And the thing is about, someone asked me, what's like a gold rush down there for meteorites, but you got to find them on public land, and most people find them on streets and cul-de-sacs and stuff. So thanks again for everybody who sent those pictures into Tim. I promise you I'll bring some great ones this week, but that'll be a great part of our show going forward. If you guys have questions, comments, or something cool you want Tim and I to explain on this show, send it our way. Send it via social media, email, or just send it to the station. We'd love to talk about it. But thanks again for joining us tonight. The show goes quick. Stick around, though. Colin's going to be coming up next.